The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
A mini Alcatraz or a perpetual party, a startling inside look at Neverland's secret security system. Hello, I'm James Curtis. Welcome to E's coverage of the Michael Jackson trial. Now, as he often does, the King of Pop gave his fans that royal wave before entering the Santa Maria courthouse. Now, inside the courtroom, we pick up with the testimony of Brian Barron, a police officer, yes folks, a current police officer and former Jackson security guard who was assigned to the front gate at Neverland. Here's how the witness responded to questions from Assistant District Attorney Gordon Auchincloss, according to the courtroom transcripts.
Mr. Barron, you said when you were doing your daily duties, conducting your daily duties as a security guard, you'd have occasion to see Mr. Jackson on the property.
Yes.
Would you have occasion to see him interacting with his guest?
Occasionally, yes.
Would you have occasion to see guests when they weren't interacting with Mr. Jackson on the property?
Yes.
Do you know an individual by the name of Frank Tyson or Cassio?
Yes.
Who is Frank Tyson or Cassio?
From what I originally knew, he was a friend of the family, of Mr. Jackson's family, or a friend of Mr. Jackson. His family, his parents, and brothers and sisters were friends. At some point, I believe he became an employee of Mr. Jackson. What his exact duties were, I don't really know, but he was, at some point, he became an employee.
And do you have a time frame for when he was an employee, approximate?
I would say probably maybe around the year 2000, right around in there.
Okay.
And whether he is still or is not, I don't know, but...
Did Frank Cassio ever live at Neverland?
He stayed there a lot. Whether he lived there or not, as far as a primary residence, I don't know, but he was there quite often.
Would he stay there longer than a month?
Yeah, at times I think he would, yes.
Did you have an occasion to observe his relationship with Mr. Jackson?
Not on a real personal level between the two of them, no.
Did you see them together?
Yes.
And yes, the sunglasses were according to the courtroom transcripts. Next, did a message on a grease board condemn Gavin to Neverland prison?
At some point during your employment at Neverland, did you see a directive on the board concerning Gavin?
Yes.
Do you know who Gavin is?
Yes.
First of all, tell us how you know Gavin.
Because he was a guest at the ranch.
Okay, so you knew him by sight.
Yes.
And tell us what that directive was.
It simply stated, Gavin is not allowed off property.
Can you tell me the approximate time that your best recollection as to when that directive appeared on the grease board?
It was early part of 2003, January, February.
Do you know the exact date?
No.
Do you know how long it was on the grease board?
I remember it being approximately a week.
Okay. If Gavin appeared at the front gate during this period of, well, let me back up first of all. What did that directive mean to you in terms of a security officer?
That we weren't to allow him off property without some sort of permission from a supervisor.
Okay.
That would be, I would check first.
Okay. So if Gavin appeared at the gate walking out the ranch, would you let him pass?
No.
If Gavin appeared at the gate being driven out by Jesus Salas, would you let him pass?
I would check first with the ranch manager.
All right, Sean Howard, Ricky, this is pretty good testimony for the prosecution, and the backdrop of it is this guy is a current police officer.
He's not only a current police officer. This actor who portrays him looks like a current police officer.
Police officer tie, no?
There is that look. He has an aura of authority. The real person does as well. And what we have here is someone who makes legitimate the claims of the wacky mom in saying that she and her children were falsely imprisoned. They were not permitted to leave.
And Howard staunchly disagrees.
No, well, not only do I disagree, it seems to me perfectly logical that you wouldn't want a kid who has been portrayed as uncontrollable, like Gavin, to be wandering off the property in the middle of the San Ynez Valley. So if the kid walked up to the gate and wanted to walk out, I would hope they wouldn't let him just walk out.
Yeah, but Sean, apparently this was an exception to the rule. No other kids had this sort of directive.
Well, James, you don't know that, and there's no such testimony.
Well, no, testimony does come out. It does come out that way. Go ahead, Sean.
And as we'll hear on cross-examination, there's another reasonable explanation for why this directive is on the board, and that is that the parent wasn't there. And so, of course, they had a directive not to let a child off the property without the parent giving permission to do so. That
Yes,
comes
but
out very clearly.
it's not just a child. It is this child.
but
There
this
is
is
not
a
an order
child.
about other children.
But this is
by
a
name.
child on the ranch at this time who doesn't have parental supervision. So it makes perfect sense.
And who everybody has said is uncontrollable, and runs around wild.
This is the
crashed the golf
only
cart.
time that they had this kind of a specific directive.
Sounds to me
For
like
a
a perfect,
kid.
reasonable doubt.
Well, yeah, everything sounds like reasonable doubt to you, Howard. That's not, as if that would be a test. Now, on cross-examination, I missed you, Howard. On cross-examination, defense attorney Robert Sanger wonders if the former security guard, and remember, folks, current police officer, I think that's a very big deal. His job was as a sworn peace officer, if, according to that job, if he ever busted anybody on Neverland.
And, in fact, had you seen anything unlawful at the ranch from 1998 to the time that you stepped away from the job, you would have been duty-bound to report that, correct?
Absolutely.
And, in fact, as a sworn peace officer, you probably, if you saw criminal activity, you probably would have been duty-bound to either investigate or even make an arrest. Is that correct?
Yes, to a point.
Okay, at the very least, report it.
Correct.
All right. And you found no need whatsoever to do that the entire time that you were there. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The people at Neverland Ranch that you worked with were made aware that you were a police officer. Is that correct?
They all knew.
All right. There was no secret.
No secret.
All right, as we continue, the cop/former security guard assigned to imprison or protect children, that's the question.
A couple of questions. Just in general, if children are on the ranch, are guests at the ranch, and they're staying there and there's not a parent present, would it be the policy of the ranch not to allow those children to go off the ranch property without supervision?
Correct.
I'll object as vague to children.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, we would not let them go off the property by themselves.
So at this time, do you know whether or not there was a parent at the ranch with Gavin Starr? Well, it was Gavin Starr, etc. So we'll say with Gavin and Starr.
I don't know for sure. I don't believe there was.
All right, so that would be a reasonable instruction for security in general, correct?
Objection argumentative calls for a conclusion.
Sustained as argumentative.
It would not be out of the ordinary, then, to not let children such as Gavin and Starr leave the ranch without approval or without supervision, correct?
Correct.
All right, Howard, this testimony, I think, is coming together nicely. Maybe not as strong as the prosecution might want, but still coming together nicely for this prosecution team.
I just disagree. Here's a police officer moonlighting at the Jackson Ranch.
Very appropriate, by
Yeah,
the
there's
way.
nothing wrong with that.
with that. I just wanted to clarify
Guys, let me
that.
get it out here.
I'm just saying.
Tough.
I'm protective of police
Protect
officers,
or
you know.
imprison. I really don't think this police officer moonlighting was imprisoning anybody. He didn't think at the time, or he wouldn't have done it. And I think it cuts against the
That's
prosecution.
very significant, I
And
think.
he also says that he observed all of these people on the ranch on more than one occasion, and none of them ever looked like they were unhappy or didn't want to be there, anything like that. He's asked that very
Now,
specifically.
that's a very
And he
good
never
point.
saw any criminal
That's a very
conduct.
good
Yes.
point, Ricky, isn't it? The idea that this guy's there and all these other individuals, well, the several that we've heard come to say this bad stuff that they observed going on in the ranch, this guy doesn't say anything bad.
Well, he doesn't happen to be the person who sees one of these allegations of these prior bad acts. I assume that as a sworn officer, if he had seen what Mr. Chacon had seen with young Jordy, that he better report it.
But if everyone there, he says, knows he's a police officer, and he sees Janet, Janet sees him,
Good
wouldn't
point.
she say, help me, I'm being imprisoned, you're a police officer?
Good point, Ricky. Come on.
And by the way, when Ricky said what Mr. Chacon saw, I know she meant what Mr. Chacon says.
I said
he
it was
saw.
an allegation.
Yes,
I said it
yes,
was an
yes, but that's a
allegation.
good point. Come on,
But
Ricky, you gotta give it up.
I always give Howard credit when he deserves it, and he
When he
deserves it most of the time.
I'll take it.
But the reality of what you're dealing with here, I do think that Sean's point is really well taken. One of the problems the prosecution has in this case is that Janet is surrounded, the mother is surrounded with people to whom she can complain
Yes.
that she is being held against her will, and she does not complain.
Yes,
That's
and
a very big point for the
That's got to be the bottom line with this witness. He's a cop, folks, a sworn police officer, gun carrying, arrest you, anyway. When we return, what is it like to protect the King of Pop? Stay with us.
The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back. A cruel lord of the manor or just a commanding presence? Under questioning by defense attorney Robert Sanger, police officer and former Neverland security guard Brian Barron describes working for the King of Pop. Here's what the jurors heard according to the courtroom transcripts.
The ranch itself you understood to be Mr. Jackson's home, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that security was instructed to do was to accord Mr. Jackson respect as a person who is trying to live in his home, correct?
Absolutely.
So the idea was to not unduly approach him or burden him or take up his time while he's trying to be at home, correct?
That's correct.
And have you ever worked for any other celebrities or people of that sort?
No.
But that made sense to you, didn't it?
Absolutely.
All right. When you say that when Mr. Jackson was there, people were on pins and needles, did you mean by that to suggest that Mr. Jackson was a harsh or mean boss of some sort?
No.
Just the structure of the people there through the various commands and different departments made everybody aware that when Mr. Jackson's on the property that you need to be on your best behavior, right?
Yes.
And you didn't see anything wrong with that, did you?
No. Not necessarily, no.
Cross-examination worthy of the great Howard Weitzman, perhaps. On redirect examination, Assistant District Attorney Gordon Auchincloss goes back to the drawing board, or in this case, the grease board.
Have you ever seen a directive like this on one of the logs before that told the security guards not to let a child off the property?
No.
Have you ever seen a directive before like the one you saw on the grease board that said, do not let Gavin off the property?
No.
During your 5 years, did you ever see anything of that nature during your employment?
No.
Objection asked and answered.
I said before, and this contemplates the entire period.
All right. The objection is overruled. It's answered.
All right, Howard, I hate to keep picking on you. Actually, I like picking on you. You know that, Howard. This witness will go on to say, quote, and can you tell me, this is further questioning by the prosecutor, and can you tell me, based on your experience and training at Neverland, who would have the authority to make such an order on the grease board or in the logs? And he says, ultimately, Michael Jackson.
Yeah, but he has no idea if Michael Jackson, in fact, ordered that to be put on or not. And even if he did, again, here's a kid who we know ran wild. Maybe he is an exception to the general rule of kids that are there, and they wanted to make sure he was not allowed off the premises, especially without the mother there.
All right, Sean, not even you can afford to buy that and buy into that analysis. He's the only kid in the history of Neverland, or at least in the history of the experience of this witness, who this rule had to be made for. Come on.
Make me look good.
Come on.
I'm sorry. I'm with Howard on this one. This officer testifies that it made perfect sense to him, this directive, given that the parents were not there, that the mother was not there. He also talks about the fact that the gates are such that as you go a couple of feet or yards, you could simply walk off. You could leave if you wanted to. And another thing, he talks about the fact that there's a fire department, an actual fire department on the ranch. That follows up on my earlier point that these people could have gone to one of the firemen and said, get me out of here. You're people of authority. We are being imprisoned.
Right.
Help us.
Ricky will save me when we come back.
I'm ready.
Next.
I am ready.
He's ready to go. Now, what jurors don't hear is often as important to the trial as what they do hear. Now, in this trial, one of the most important and most heated arguments presented outside of the presence of the jury concerned whether or not prosecutors could call on an expert in battered women's syndrome. Now, the district attorney wants the expert to explain the erratic behavior of the accuser's mother toward Michael Jackson, at the very least, and his affiliates. But before we hear the lawyers go at it, let's take a look back at some of the earlier testimony by Janet, Gavin's mom.
When you were seeking money from J.C. Penney and Tower Records, you testified under oath on December 18th, the year 2000, that you never had any black and blue marks prior to the incident at J.C. Penney, correct?
Yes, this is correct. I was too embarrassed to ever tell anyone.
You made that statement because you wanted any injury you ever had to be attributed to J.C. Penney and Tower Records, right?
Incorrect. What J.C. Penney's and Tower Records did to me was one day, one situation, one incident, that's it.
If you had testified truthfully under oath and said that your bruises were from David, the amount of monetary damages you could get from J.C. Penney would have been lowered. True?
This is incorrect. I would have never told anyone until David got arrested that David was giving me these bruises. Never. People would see me with bruises, and I would never, never, never tell them.
You did say under oath that David is extremely honest. He's too honest?
Yes.
And you weren't telling the truth when you made that statement under oath, correct?
Anything to do with David, no. That's why I went to the civil attorneys to try to correct that after he was arrested.
Now, we get to the argument by Assistant District Attorney Gordon Auchincloss. Keep it down, you guys. His argument to allow the expert testimony. Now, was Gavin's mom programmed by a violent environment is the question.
There are many misconceptions about how Janet should act. Given the stimulus of the defendant's conduct in this particular case, specifically, these are problem areas for this jury that this expert will help them now to wade through. Specifically, why did she return to her abusers at Neverland? The jury needs to understand that victims of domestic violence virtually always return to their abusers. Why didn't she go to the police? Why doesn't she report this? Victims of domestic violence, this expert will testify, victims of domestic violence, when they're threatened, when they're abused, when they're taken advantage of, they virtually never go to the police. Why does she lie under oath? Now here's an important point. The defense has placed that fact in the center of their attack on Janet. They've charged her with perjury. They made a big deal about it. They questioned her extensively about that. And this expert will come forward and tell you that victims of domestic violence virtually always or routinely lie under oath and protect their abusers. And that's exactly what she did in this case.
All right, I want to talk about this battered woman syndrome issue in a moment, but I want to first hear what the defense's response is. We'll get to that. Let's go back for a moment if we can.
I just wanted to help you out like you asked me to do, but I just want to tidy up two things. Number one is, he is there for an approximately 5-year period. I had said if he had seen things like Mr. Barron, that if he had seen things with Jordy, that he would have reported them. Of course, Jordy is years before he is there. He is there when Gavin is there. But as I understand it, the false imprisonment claim is by Mom and the kids. And so Mom is there when the directive is allegedly up.
Or is she? Or is she?
That's exactly the question.
Well, wait a minute. Where was her name on the grease board? Did they want to prevent her from going?
Exactly.
Well, that's a good point.
And that's what came to my head. I think it jumped out of Howard's head into mine. The false imprisonment is with respect to the family.
Yes.
And this directive is just toward Gavin. We still got a little bit of a gap here.
Ricky gave me that soft pitch.
Yeah, well,
That's all right. It's all right. But I'm going to give you another soft pitch right here to you and Sean, which has to do with this argument dealing with the battered women syndrome. Because I had thought what they were going to argue, the prosecution was going to say is, look, she's a battered woman, so she lies about being abused by her husband, because that's what battered women would do. But really what they've argued here is that she goes back to the people who victimize her. They're arguing the false imprisonment claim.
You want to know something? If I look at Auchincloss's argument, here's my response. Grifters stay on their mark, return to their mark. Grifters never go to the police. Grifters often lie whether it's under oath or not.
Yeah, well,
perfect description.
And certainly, and we'll see if the defense team is as brilliant as our own Howard Weitzman and company. When we return, was Gavin's mother prey or predator? Stay with us.
The reenactments and commentary in this program may contain frank talk of a sexual nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back. Should an expert on battered woman syndrome be allowed to explain the unusual behavior of Gavin's mother? Well, you've heard what our brilliant commentators have to say about what the defense argument should be. Here's what the actual defense argument was by Robert Sanger. Here's what he told the judge, according to the courtroom transcripts.
But responding to what Mr. Auchincloss said in an effort to answer the court's question, we didn't make her perjury relevant. She has committed perjury. I think it's pretty clear in this court from the stand. And she has said things that are preposterous, that are absolutely counter to the other evidence in the case. And that's not because she's a battered woman. That's because she lies for gain. I don't want to be unnecessarily harsh, but let's face it. That's what this is about. She took the fifth so that she has that protection to not be cross-examined. But the court is going to allow us to bring in evidence that she lied for gain on repeated declarations for money and got that money and continued to get that money and lied and cheated her way through life. That is what she does. That has nothing to do with being a battered woman.
Ooh, how does he really feel about it?
I like
take it
that
that the intensity was in the courtroom. Sean Chapman Holly. Ultimately, the judge says no.
Yes.
So much for Howard's. The train is on the tracks.
Yes.
He doesn't let it in, but he does let some other stuff in and keep some other stuff out.
Yes, you know, the motion made by the prosecution to let this battered women syndrome expert come in demonstrates that they know that this witness is a real problem
Took
for
the
them.
words right out of my head.
Yeah, they recognize that. And of course, the judge makes the right ruling. This would be a peripheral issue. It would take far too much time. And I think that the defense argument is well taken, which is that, no, she's a liar. We didn't make it an issue. She is what she is.
And unfortunately, that was not in front of the jury. That was outside the president's jury. They'll no doubt hear that type of argument. We got to talk about the Vaseline ruling. Who wants to take that?
Yeah, we all took a breath.
You've been looking forward to this all show.
Well, this goes, you say the train is on the track. Here, the defense got another one.
And let's explain exactly what we're talking about.
Even the
here.
judge couldn't allow this testimony, and that is that the battered woman syndrome testimony, because it really.
Let's explain what the Vaseline ruling is real quick.
10 seconds.
The defense wanted, the prosecution wanted testimony by another security person to come in that Michael Jackson said, go out to my car and get my jar of Vaseline.
You know what? I thought the whole motion was disingenuous. I thought it was an attempt, in my opinion, to get this information out to the press.
We have to leave it right there. We'll catch up with it on the weekend show.
Right.
Watch our exclusive coverage weekends 10 and 4 right here on E!